Yes, in his little monk's hat, looking at that, like a little Lama, right? And what we want to do, so simply for baby blessing, which we'll do as a little chant and ritual and so forth, to welcome Jai into this community of beings. There is, in the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha talks about how a mother or father loves their only child as a model for loving kindness. The kind of love that you have is the love that he then commends that you spread across the world. And it's in a certain way where you learn it, or in the African tradition, I learned from Malidoma and Sobonfu, that every baby who comes in has a unique song. And you want to listen for the song of this particular being. And support them so that they can sing their song and do their dance and bring their particular gifts into the world. Your gift of grace and courage and laughter and wisdom and health and all those things he carries. Because this is really the Buddha. You have a baby Buddha. And your job is basically to care for him and let him, yeah, exactly, flower. Now it turns out while he has grace and health and courage and laughter and all those wonderful things, you get to practice patience, dedication, discipline, surrender, equanimity, more patience, which are all the trainings. It's better than any Zen monastery, you know. You get sick and you just stay up all night. You have to take care of him. You know, if the guru or the Zen master says, sit up all night, you say, well, maybe I'll catch a little nap. But when Jai says, up all night, you know, the Zen master, you have to listen to him. So he's the perfect practice for the perfect guru, exactly. You got that. And you, Jai, in India, there's a little saying that says when the baby is in the womb, there's a little song that sings, oh, do not let me forget who I really am. Yeah, and then when you're born, then you start to forget. Don't forget. Remember who you are, right? Do not forget. Oh dear, I'm forgetting already. So we give to you one thread from the robe of a monk. This is your little monk's robe thread to tie around your wrist. And as I do, blessings to you. Oh yeah. May you be blessed as the Buddha, to see the Buddha in every being and bring the Buddha, hey, you're complaining already? I know how that is. May you be blessed to follow the way of the Dharma and the path of truth, and may you be blessed by the Sangha and the community of all those awakening around you. May you join in the awakening of the world. May you bring your blessings in awakening. Yeah. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami. And may you, as mother and father, carry this Buddha and let him blossom as you blossom. And your whole family carries the compassion and wisdom and light that I see in you into the world. But we need to sing to him. So if you would turn around so everybody can, instead of Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, there's another old and wonderful chant for baby blessing that goes, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, 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 row your boat gently down the stream. Your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but and may you, Jai, and may your mama, Jessica, and your papa, Surya, be surrounded by the blessings of all the Buddhas and angels and devas and saints and everything else good. And may your song be sung into the world and your music and your dance be danced. And may you be truly, truly happy. And this is your community. Take a look around. These are your peeps. Bless you. Thank you. Bye. See you in a little bit. So before we take a break, just one more thing. A few announcements. If you haven't come before, there's a table in the back corner of the room where you can sign up. I'll start with a poem, maybe just to set a little of the tone for the evening, from one of my friends in Oakland, who's a fine poet, Alison Luterman. I haven't read this for a while. She writes, "Don't tell anyone, but even as a good Jewish girl, I love Jesus. I love his dark Semitic eyes and how his friends are all the poor and the prostitutes, and how he will even go to hell for love. He's just like that Buddhist bodhisattva of compassion, 𝐜𝐨𝐴𝐵, except his name is easier to pronounce. It's hard to yell for 𝐜𝐴𝐵 when you're in big trouble. But oh, Jesus comes naturally. I just don't want to die saying, oh shit. I'd rather die like a Lama, lie on my right side and turn my head in the direction of my next birth. I know I'd have to meditate a lot to do that well, and let's face it, there aren't enough years left in my life to get that enlightened. And following Jesus seems so much easier. All you have to do is love everyone." Well, seems is the critical word here. Sometimes it seems impossible, especially with the particular people around you. But then, if you really look, you realize, what else is there to do? What else is there to do? So, one of the themes of this kind of spiritual conversation, if you will, that comes through these Dharma talks over the course of Monday nights and in the community is realistically looking at what it is that will keep our spirit alive, and what it is that will allow us to embody the wisdom, compassion, generosity, all the things that, when you sang to little Jai, all the things that, you might offer to a child as blessings and want for yourself. Now, in the Buddhist teachings, it's very clear from the beginning. The Buddha says, I'm not teaching these in order for you to become Buddhists. You spare your friends and family. I'm teaching these because they're a path to happiness. And the genuine path to happiness, as is laid out in these teachings, is the path of generosity. That you become more happy as you learn and practice and develop the capacity of generosity. The practice of happiness is the path of integrity or virtue, not to harm others in word and deed, not just because it's a good thing to do, but also it's what makes happiness in your heart and for others. Even the littlest beings like it. I have this wonderful poem from Lloyd Reynolds, the great American calligrapher. He writes, "A bug crawls over the paper, leave him be, we need all the readers we can get." Even the little ones, So non-harming feels good to you, and it also feels good to the bug and other beings. And that makes happiness. Mindfulness brings happiness because it's only in the present that one is alive. If you want to love, as that poem talks about, the only place you can really love is in the present. Love in the past is a memory. Might be a good memory, but still a memory. Love in the future is a fantasy. The only place you can actually love the smell of the bay trees or the person in front of you or the, twilight in the summer is here and now in the present. So mindfulness brings us to be with the present. And it brings happiness, it brings aliveness, freedom. And that is the other form of happiness the Buddha speaks about, a kind of inner freedom that's possible. Now all of these qualities are born or grow out of another capacity. And in the last teachings of the Buddha, in this story of the last part of the Buddha's life, students came to him and disciples and monks who are close to him and said, "What will we do when the Buddha isn't here to talk to and to counsel us and to guide us and so forth? Who will be our teacher and what will we do?" And he replied at one point, he said, "As long as followers of the way of freedom and compassion, meet in harmony and speak to one another in harmony and depart in harmony, as long as they respect the traditions of the past that have been beneficial to them and to one another, as long as they honor and respect their elders, as long as they honor and respect those around them who are vulnerable and weak, as long as they respect the nature and the environment within which they live, as long as they respect and preserve their own personal practice of compassion and mindfulness, so they can be expected to prosper and not decline." It goes on, it's a whole long series of teachings. If you wish to carry these teachings of deep inner happiness in your life, generosity, virtue, mindfulness, they are based on bringing a quality of respect to this body, to this moment, to this person in front of you, to this world that we're born into. And the respect then allows us to treat ourself and that which is also ourself, but bigger than this small sense of self, in the same way. Now, in keeping the sacred alive, if you will, we'll use a different language for this, mostly it is a matter not so much of doing something, but of remembering. And so I'll tell a story tonight that I like to tell every couple years or so. I haven't told it for a year or two, and it's one of my favorite stories. Once, a long time ago, when you were a bit younger than you are now, in ancient India, no, I think we should set this story. In ancient England. How's that? Thought you'd get an Indian story, but it's an English story. There was a knight who belonged to the community around King Arthur. Sir Gawain was his name, and he was like Lancelot, both brave and handsome, and had many of the virtues of a great knight. And he went exploring, and he went way out into the distant lands of the kingdom at that time, and found himself in a deep and dark wood, which can happen to any of us. You may have been there yourself, or you might even be there this night itself. And he got lost, and the more he struggled to get out of the deep and dark wood, the more he got entangled in brambles and darkness and great trees, and a great thirst came upon him, and some fear because it was getting dark and there was no way to get out. And all of a sudden, in this thirst, he came to a clearing. It was just getting dark, and there was a well. Beautiful stone well, well-crafted stone. Somehow, magic in this clearing in this deep, dark woods. And he got down from his horse, went over to the well, dipped the bucket into the water, pulled it up, and had a really beautiful, quenching drink of this delicious water in the midst of the forest. And thought, well, I'm not going to get out tonight, I might as well take rest here, and took off his saddle blanket and began to lay down. And as he lay there, and the moon was beginning to rise, in the distance he heard the sound of horse hooves coming through the forest. You know, this is like a bedtime story, right? And of course he sat up. And there, at the edge of the clearing, finally in the moonlight, came this amazing white horse that he could see just partly through the trees. And riding it was a woman with this long flowing hair and wearing a silver gown that was lit by the moonlight, this amazing looking woman. And she came circling around and riding up to him, this fantastic woman, and then she turned her face to him, and he saw a woman not like he expected. He thought this beautiful woman was arriving, then she turned around, and one eye was kind of hanging out, and there were warts, and her teeth were all misshapen, and she was a hag. In fact, she was the 𝐜𝐴𝐺𝐵 is her name, but she has other names too. She's named Kali, and she's named Baba Yaga in Russia, and she is the old woman that stirs the pot of all things in the world. She's the one that created the world. She's the woman, she can take all kinds of forms, and in all these cultures, whether it's Kali or Baba Yaga or the 𝐜𝐴𝐺𝐵, she's the woman who knows everything. And she came and she turned, she said, "Not what you expected, hmm?" He smiled. And she said, "Ah, the great knight." He said, "I am not a great knight, I'm lost." Actually said, she said, "I knew that, of course." She said, "But what are you doing at this sacred well, the sacred well of the feminine?" Which is what it was. This is the sacred well in the midst of the forest. And he said, "Well, I got lost and I was here and I was terribly thirsty and I took some water to drink." And she said, "You did?" Without permission. He said, "Well, I'm so sorry, madam. I'm truly, truly sorry," being somewhat chivalrous. He said, "And if there is anything I can do to make up for having taken water from your sacred well, why, as a knight, I offer myself to your service." And she said, "Well, quite fine. Yes, there actually is something you could do." He said, "Anything, madam." And she said, "Well, I'm looking for a husband, and I think you will do. So what I would like, since you have taken of my sacred water, is that we should wed, since you've offered me anything." He gulped and sat for a while and looked at her and then said, "Tell me, is there anything else you would like?" And she said, "No. No, I think you'd make a fine husband." And he said, "Well, is there any other way? I see this is an enchanted grove and you are a great, great woman. Is there any other way I might perhaps serve you beside as your husband, that I could also pay back for this drink from the sacred well?" And she said, "Well, there's one possible thing you could do, and that is that if you could answer a question that I pose to you, then I will release you from this promise you've made." And he said, "Excellent. What's the question?" And the question she posed was, "What is it that women want?" He again knew he was in trouble. Trouble just goes from one trouble to another, basically. And he said, "Might have a little time to contemplate." And she said, "I will give you a year. And we will meet back at this same well in 1 year. And you can bring me your answer. And if you have the answer, I free you from your obligation. And if not, we have it. And in the morning there will be a path clearly shown to you out of the forest." And she got on her horse and disappeared in the moonlight. Well, the morning came. He rode back out of the forest and rode back quickly to the castle and assembled his knight friends, told the story and said, "I'm in trouble. I need you guys to help me." So he got the knights to go around the kingdom with these great big old books, you know what they were like, and to talk to as many women as they could and write down what it is that women want. And they were filled with women want children, women want to be loved, women want their own land, women want power, women want, beauty, women want gold, women want creativity, whatever it was, women want. And the books were filled with all these things that women might want. Credit cards. And after a year, he felt reassured and he carried these books back in his saddlebags all the way back into the dark forest and waited. And sure enough, the moon rose And he heard the horse come, and she dismounted, and there she was, and she said, "Have you answered my question? What it is that women really want?" And he said, "I have, madam," and he began to read to her from the books. Women want love, women want property, women want children. He read one page after page after page, and she just kept shaking her head, and finally he got to the last one. His heart sank, and he said, "This is not the answer." He said, "No." She said, "So, when's the wedding?" He said, "Well, how about if we go and have a little private wedding in the chapel?" He said, No, private, you're a great knight. We need a big celebration. The kingdom should be invited." "So I will go with you," she said, and they rode out of the forest together back to the castle, and as she insisted, they had a huge wedding, all the kingdom, knights, banquets, the whole deal. And there was 𝐜𝐨𝐳𝐬, and there was the hag. And everyone had mixed feelings about this wedding. But it went forward because it needed to. He had made his promise as a knight, chivalrous as he was. And the wedding finished. They made a great toast, and then they removed themselves to the bridal chamber. There they were in the bridal chamber after the wedding, and the woman he married, the hag, or 𝐼𝐴𝐺𝐻, whatever your name you like to give to her, sat on the bed, and he sat on a chair nearby. And she said, "Aren't you going to come to bed, dear?" He said, "Wouldn't you like to kiss your bride?" And he sat for a minute and kind of sat back, and she said, "I thought you were a brave knight." A little bit of a challenge to the fellow. He took a deep breath and moved over to her and kissed her. And the moment he did, an extraordinary change took place in her. And because 𝐼𝐴𝐺𝐻 and Kali takes 1,000 forms, she changed from the form of the hag into a glowing and beautiful princess, as happens in many of these stories. And she said, "There was, in fact, a kind of enchantment that I was under, and now you have partially released me from this enchantment." And he was, of course, thrilled, and she was thrilled. They were both very happy about it, and he kissed her again, a number of times again. And she said, "But there's one more small problem." She said, "Now that you have released me from this enchantment, I can be beautiful for you and myself for half the time. I can be this way at night, and we will share our bedchamber. Wonderful. But then in the day, I resume the form of the hag. Or, if you choose, I can be this way, in this beautiful form in the daytime. And then at night, I must resume the form of the hag. Which would you like?" More hot water. Kissed her a few more times and contemplated. And felt, as one does, inadequate to a really deep question like that. How do you answer that? And finally, 𝐜𝐴𝐺𝐻 looked at her, now in her beautiful and radiant form, and said, "Really, I cannot say. Rather," he said, "it is up to you. What would you choose?" And in that moment, a great smile broke across her face. She threw her arms out and said, "The spell has been broken, for this was the answer to what women want." And the answer in the ancient language is the word sovereignty, which means to be respected for who they are, whatever it happens to be, rather than the list of this and that and so forth. It is the vow of respect. What would you like, dear? Would you like, the daytime or the nighttime? I leave it to you. What would you choose? And in that gesture of respect, she was freed from the spell, and he was freed from the spell, because it was really a joint spell. And they lived happily ever after. Now, if you read in the Buddhist texts the guidelines for relationships between people, there's a text which describes the duties and the proper relationship between employers and employees, between spouses or lovers, between parents and children. And in each of the verses of this text, along with particular obligations, in each of these verses is that whoever is in this station respects the person, and that the employer respects the employee and treats them with respect. The employee treats the employer with respect. The parent treats their child with respect. The child treats their parent with respect. And then here are the other things, the child gets educated in inheritance and various things that come, and the parent gets respect and dedication from the child, and so forth. This whole kind of articulation of the exchanges of care that we have for one another. To be awake, to come to wakefulness, and the word Buddha means one who is awake, is to learn to offer respect to the world as it is, to ourselves and to one another. To see the world in a respectful way. Thich Nhat Hanh, Zen master, when he teaches walking meditation, he says, when you do your walking meditation, plant your feet on the surface of the earth the way an empress or an emperor would place their seal on a royal decree. A royal decree can bring happiness or misery to people. It can shower grace on them, or it can ruin their lives. Your steps can do the same. If your steps are peaceful, mindful, respectful, the world will have peace. If you can take one peaceful step, you can take 100 peaceful steps. You can move through this world with peace and respect. So, the quality of respect can be offered to the environment, as that Buddhist text says, the grasses and the trees and the rivers, and the food and one's elders and those around us. And even if it's a difficult situation, maybe even more so when you think of the difficulties you're in, the capacity to bow to this and say, this is a difficulty, this is a loss, this is an illness, this is a struggle, and to honor it with respect rather than saying no and pushing it away or getting lost, reacting in ways that are fearful, to say, this is the way it is. To treat difficulties as well starts to transform them. There's something almost magical about respect. So this is a story I read a few weeks ago, but it fits so well, and I want to read it one more time. A small unit of American soldiers was walking through a street in the holy city of Najaf in Iraq, where there's a big shrine, when hundreds of Iraqis poured out of the buildings on either side. 20 soldiers, surrounded by perhaps 1,000 Iraqis, fists waving, throats taut, pressing in on the Americans, who glanced at one another in terror. The Iraqis were shrieking, frantic with rage. "This is it, I thought," said the journalist. "A shot will come from somewhere, the Americans will open fire, and the world will witness the massacre central to the Iraq War." At that moment, an American officer stepped through the crowd, holding his rifle high over his head with the barrel pointed to the ground. Against the backdrop of the seething crowd, it was a striking gesture, almost biblical. Take a knee
the officer said, impassive behind his glasses. The soldiers looked at him as if he were crazy, and then one after another, swaying in their bulky body armor and gear, they knelt before the boiling crowd and pointed their guns at the ground. The Iraqis fell silent, and their anger subsided. The officer ordered his men to withdraw. It took me 2 months to again track down Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hughes, who by then had been rotated home, and I wanted to ask who had taught him to tame a crowd by pointing his rifle muzzle down and having his men kneel. And of course he said no one had taught him. He just knew that firing warning shots, the next thing you know, you have to fire real shots. He said, I understood that the Iraqis already felt that we were disrespecting their mosque, their community, and their sacred place. The obvious solution was a gesture of respect. To be able to offer a gesture of respect, even when things are difficult, is such a gift. It's a gift to ourselves. It's a gift to others. And it's central to the practice of mindfulness. When we come and we sit in meditation, and all these things start to open up within us as we start to train ourselves in mindfulness, they ask for our respect. The breath wants to breathe itself. You sit down and think, all right, now I'm going to be mindful of this breath as a way to connect and be present. And the breath is shallow or deep or coarse or rough or long. It doesn't matter. It's not a breath practice. You're not trying to have a kind of breath that you imagine, but rather to say, oh, this is a shallow breath. This is a deep breath. This is what it feels like when the breath is held and tight. And also the breath becomes a mirror. Then you start to feel the tight breath, and you feel the tightness in your body, and you bow to that and say, this is what it's like when the body feels tight. And the body goes, oh, thank you for paying attention to me. You don't have to do much more than that. Mindfulness is the gesture of saying, oh, this is the way it is, with spaciousness, without judgment, without trying to change it in some way or another. To respect is to listen to the way things are. So you listen to the body, and it begins to teach you, this is what needs to be paid attention to. John Ciardi, the poet, writes, let's see if I can find this. He writes, an ulcer is an unkissed imagination taking its revenge for having been jilted. It is an undanced dance, an unpainted watercolor, an unwritten poem. So there's a kind of respect for the body and what it wants to do, to move, to be alive, to open, that is central to the practice of mindfulness. It's in the foundations of mindfulness. The Buddha says the wonderful way to live is to be mindful of body, of feelings, of mind, of the world in which we live. In the same way we sit, and all the different emotions will arise in us. Longing and loneliness. Sometimes we sit, and what happens in meditation is the unfinished business of the heart shows itself. The tears you haven't shed, the hopes that are in the heart. Poet Hafiz writes, don't surrender your loneliness so quickly. Let it cut more deeply. Let it ferment and season you as few human or even divine ingredients can. Because if you can't sit with your loneliness or your boredom or your fear, then what happens is you immediately, open the refrigerator, turn on the TV, distract yourself, do something. because you can't be with yourself. So instead you bow to your loneliness. Oh, this is what loneliness is like. You befriend it, you find respect, you bow to your longing. The same for joy. Some people find it, they're loyal to their suffering. You know that? And then joy comes sneaking in. And, oh, is it all right to feel happy? It's more than all right. It's one of the factors of enlightenment. It's one of the qualities that open the heart. And so joy also needs to be respected. And the moments of connection and love and beauty, those too need to be bowed to. And then, of course, the mind. The mind will do anything. You've probably noticed that. You even sit, maybe this is your first time at Spirit Rock, your first time meditating, right? And already you notice that the mind has no pride. You tell it, please quiet down. Pay attention to this breath, this body. What does it do? Does it listen to you? It has a mind of its own, right? It will do anything. And that cartoon that I like to talk about from the New Yorker that shows the car driving across the Utah desert, vast landscape, in the roadside billboard that says your own tedious thoughts next 200 miles. Right? Meditation, okay? It just has its thoughts, and it tells its stories, a million stories that it tells. Try, you don't like that one? Oh, here's another story. And it creates worlds. Oh, how good it will be, and how terrible it was, or how good it was, how terrible it will be, and so forth. And as you sit as the Buddha, training yourself in this quality of mindfulness and respect, you bow to, oh, this is the planning mind, and this is the remembering mind, and this is the, mind telling stories. You keep your seat in the center of it all. And the same mindfulness of body, feelings, mind, mindfulness of relations to one another. Again, offering your respect. A story from Sakyong Mipham Rinpoche, who's Chogyam Trungpa's Dharma successor and son, who's a great horseman. And he writes, when I was staying with friends in Colorado, I took one of my favorite horses, Rocky, on a trail ride through some of the distant back country. I'd ridden Rocky before, mostly in the arena. He was very intelligent, but he didn't know how to walk a trail. It was a new situation. I was leading the group, and that also made him a little nervous. I coaxed him over certain rocks and shifted my weight to indicate to him to go around certain others, but he kept stumbling. We came to a narrow place in the trail. On one side was a steep shale cliff, and on the other, a long drop into a river. Rocky stopped and waited for my direction. We both knew that one wrong move would plummet us into the river below. I guided him toward the gorge, subtly shifting my weight toward the high wall of shale. I thought that if he slipped, I could jump off and save myself. The moment I shifted, Rocky stopped cold and craned his head around to look at me. He knew exactly what I was doing. I could tell that he was shocked and hurt that I was planning to abandon him. The look in his eye said, "You and me together, right?" Seeing how terrified he was, I shifted my weight back. He swung his head forward in relief, and we negotiated the trail together with no problems. Again, it's the quality of being present with respect. That we have to go through things, sometimes scary things, sometimes difficult, sometimes beautiful things together. And when we offer the presence of our mindfulness and respect, then things open. The qualities of freedom, generosity, integrity, all come out of it. Now, we live in a culture where we're trained to fix things and do stuff and make them be the certain way they're supposed to be. And that quality of control, the Buddha said, this land is mine, these children are mine. These are words of folly from a man who does not know that even he is not his. Your body is not yours. You rent it for a while. You get it for an incarnation, and you get to take care of it and respect it and honor it. But it's not who you are. And if you think your feelings are who you are, you're really in trouble. And if you think your thoughts are who you are, you're even in more trouble, right? Instead, there is the body of fear, the separate sense of self, and there is the one who knows, the space of awareness that says, oh, this is loneliness, and this is longing, and this is joy, and this is love. The knowing of the Buddha that is in you that can bow to each of the things that's present. So to meditate, we practice stepping out of the body of fear, not even trying to change it, but resting in the space of awareness and noticing this is fear, and this is love, this is longing, and this is joy, and allowing each of these things to rise and fall as they will, to see the way things are. And then the universe starts to teach us, to show us. This from science lessons and from middle school. Can you please explain certain things to the middle school students? The law of gravity says no fair jumping up without coming back down. That's what it means. Genetics explains why you look like your father, and if you don't, why you should. Momentum is something you give a person when they go away. And blood circulates through the body by flowing down one leg and up the other. Okay? So one has to pay attention. And as you do, as you begin to pay attention, not imagining this is the way things are supposed to be, but being present for the way things actually are, there comes a settling, an opening, a spaciousness, an ease, and a kind of fearlessness that's not the absence of fear, but rather a space that can allow for all things. I had some friends who were involved in the anti-nuclear movement in England. And they were part of, I'm trying to remember, was it the 𝐉𝐚𝐜𝐿 group that was trying to stop the deployment of additional nuclear missiles in England? Maybe it was 10 or 12 years ago or something like that, maybe a bit longer. And at one point, through their protests and also their political work, they got a meeting with the general who was the, at that time, the British commander and the head of NATO in Europe. And they talked about how they would speak to him because they were so concerned about the growing nuclear proliferation. And when they sat down with him, the first thing they said was, it must be really difficult to feel you have the responsibility for the safety of a whole nation or a whole continent of Western Europe on your shoulders. And that gesture of respect for his circumstance and position allowed a genuine conversation to take place that couldn't have any other way. To listen with respect expands the sense of who we are. It doesn't say, okay, that's the enemy over there. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote, if only it were so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds and it were necessary just to round them up and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who among us is willing to destroy a piece of their own heart? So there's the listening to our own body and feelings and mind, and the listening to one another. A woman I knew who used to come and meditate together with us was one of the founders of the Compassionate Listening Project. And what they had done, and may still be doing, I haven't talked to them in some years, was to go to all the parts of the world where people didn't feel listened to the pariahs especially, if you will. They went to Libya during the period that Muammar Gaddafi was not being, spoken to by anyone. They went to Lebanon and talked to people on every side. They went to Bosnia and Armenia. And what they did was try to sit down with people that a lot of other countries and and in diplomatic circles and so forth had exiled, and say, we want to listen to you. We want to understand you. We want to know. Try it in your family. You'll see. it actually works very well. This from Children's Letters to God, one of those, books that are written in kids' handwriting. Dear God, maybe Cain and Abel would not kill each other so much if they had their own rooms. It works with me and my brother. But, in fact, everybody wants it. When I find myself getting in an argument and a conflict with my wife or my daughter, if I come from the place of being angry and I feel like you didn't do this, or I wanted you, or you're not, or whatever, all of that, it doesn't generally go terribly well. We just get into somebody being blamed and somebody else being blamed, and we kind of get in that circle of, how anger works. But if I listen underneath the anger, and can sense that underneath it is actually a sense, often, that I feel hurt, or I feel afraid, and I can say, oh, I'm nervous, or I'm afraid, or I feel hurt. It's a much more engaging conversation. And then if I become curious, instead of saying, you did this, say, how is it for you? I want to understand what happened for you in this. Rather than being the person who knows, if I approach, instead of trying to defend myself, say, I want to listen, I want to know. That quality of respect makes an entirely different relationship. Everybody loves respect. Your garden, your employees, your friends, your children, your parents. So, even your dog. Here's a story. A man began to give large doses of cod liver oil to his Doberman because he'd been told that the stuff was good for dogs. Each day he would hold the head of the protesting dog between his knees, force its jaw open, and pour the liquid down its throat. One day the dog broke loose and spilled the oil on the floor. Then, to the man's great surprise, it returned to lick the spoon. That's when he discovered that what the dog had been fighting was not the cod liver oil, but his method of administering. There's no one who doesn't long for respect. The elderly and the young and the teens, those who are angry or disenfranchised, the rich, everybody. You know the story of the little boy who was out to dinner with his parents, 7 years old, in the restaurant. The waitress comes by and takes the order, and she says, what would you like? And he said, well, I'd like a hot dog and a root beer, please. And his mother said, he'll have the meatloaf and mashed potatoes and a glass of milk. She finished taking the orders, and as she was leaving the table, she looked over and said, do you want mustard or ketchup on your hot dog? He said, mustard, please. And then when she left, he looked up and he said, she thinks I'm real. So this question in the story, from King Arthur of sovereignty, it asks you, what is it that wants to be listened to in your life, in your own body, in your own heart, in the circumstance where you live, in the world around. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy. For when we're not being mindful, when we're not paying attention and respectful, then the body of fear, the small sense of self, starts to operate, and we become lost in consuming things, not just individually, but collectively. The world gets lost in all its madness and warfare and racism and us against them and all the terrible things that happen because we're not really listening. We can get lost in the separateness and the small sense of self, or we can awaken and go, oh, we are the Buddha, and offer this moment mindfulness, compassion, respect to ourselves and to the way things are. And it makes all the difference. It's really why we practice. We don't practice to have a good meditation. Okay, now I'm a good meditator. So what? Well, I don't even know what that means. We practice in order to become present to this mysterious life in a beautiful way. see. Albert Einstein, if I can find this. Maybe. No. What happened to you, Albert? Where are you? Oh, there we are. Thank you. He reappeared. He says, more and more I come to value charity and love of others above everything else. In all this world, I've learned. Without it, all our lauded technological progress, our very modern civilization is like an axe in the hand of a pathological criminal. More and more I've come to value charity and the love of others, the connection with this world above all other things. Expression of respect. One of the things that's true as we learn to meditate, learn to take the moments of spaciousness that allows us to see our whole human predicament with its joys and its sorrows, and to sit and bow to it as a Buddha, is that those moments of opening are not about figuring it all out. They're really more about letting things be. We live in a culture that's so much about wanting to figure it all out. And our lives are so much about that in the way our culture operates. And yet the really important things we don't know very much. I mean, where did we come from? Somebody have an answer? Or what happens when you die? That great mystery that's stalking you. Or what is consciousness itself? How is it that you came to be conscious? Or what is love, really? Or what's going to happen tomorrow to you or this world? We really don't know. And it's not a bad thing. It's an amazing thing. Because when we recognize it, then we begin to live more in the mystery of life. That expression, the point is not the future of humanity, but the presence of eternity. That when we cannot know so much, we shift back into the reality of the present and say, oh yes, here you are. And then the hag looks and says, well, how would you like it to be? And you say, or the princess in this case, with a bow of respect, what would you like? What would serve you? What would serve you and you and you to listen in that way? Zen Master Suzuki Roshi called this beginner's mind. We really do start over and over again. And to meditate is to stop and let ourselves sit. Take a breath, open to the sense of mystery and say, here we are. We don't know. And then to tend the garden you've been given, the community around you, the things that you care about. I remember when the Dalai Lama visited Spirit Rock some years ago for this gathering of teachers from around the world. And one of his good friends, a teacher of mine named 𝐜𝐴𝐺𝐳, who was the Gandhi of Cambodia, was also here. They hadn't seen each other for a while. And they met. The Dalai Lama's car pulled up there, his entourage, and he got out, and 𝐜𝐴𝐺𝐳 was there to greet him. And some of you, I know, have seen the photograph or the painting of it that my daughter did from that photograph. She got that photograph and made this beautiful painting. And they got out and they both started to laugh and smile, and then the Dalai Lama bowed, and Ghosananda bowed, and the Dalai Lama bowed, and they kept bowing, each one trying to bow lower than the other one. Finally their heads touched, and they were like horizontal to the ground. They couldn't bow any lower, you know. And it was such a beautiful moment to see. And then when the Dalai Lama was getting ready to leave here, he was here for some days, and there were 80 Secret Service people assigned to this particular event. There were some guys up on horseback up in the hills who were having a great time. I mean, you know, they rented horses. They were just, you know, cowboys. They were having a great time. Anyway, it was almost all over, and then they asked, the woman who was running that Secret Service detail was in her 50s, and she was having a great time. And in the end, they asked if they could have their picture taken with the Dalai Lama. And so I was up there when they did it, and the detail that day that was there at that moment, because it was a 24-hour thing, was a whole bunch of them. And there's a Dalai Lama grinning in the middle, and they're all there. And they said, you know, we have guarded everybody, princes and prime ministers and, you know, dictators and queens and kings and presidents and people from all over, and whatever the State Department assigns us, dignitaries from all over. But this is different, you know. We've guarded and taken care of all of these so-called, these special people. But this is different. I said, what makes this different? They said, well, it's different because the Dalai Lama treats us as if we're special. And then he went around and he took everybody's hand and blessed them. You know, and these Secret Service men and women, they were just grinning. It was the most beautiful thing to see. That kind of respect that he offers to each person that he meets. Trust, quality of respect is also a certain gesture of trust in it. A beautiful thing. Those who do not have faith in others will not be able to stand on their own. Those who are suspicious will always be lonely, writes the Zen master Sheng-yen. The trusting heart. And William Butler Yeats, in his dialogue of Self and Soul, he says, I am content to live it again and yet again. I am content to follow to its source every event in action or in thought, in reviewing his whole life. Measure the lot. Forgive myself the lot. When such as I cast out remorse, so great a sweetness flows into the breast. We must laugh and we must sing. We are blessed by everything, and everything we look upon is blessed. And we started the evening with this baby blessing, you know, sort of singing to this baby, who is really the child in all of us, the child of the Spirit that is in you still and always will be, as the Ancient One is in you as well. The child of the Spirit has the sense of mystery that's there in you, and the Ancient One is in you that says, ah yes, this too, what an amazing incarnation this is. And to sit in meditation is to reconnect with this wisdom, mindfulness, respect, whatever language you would call it, and to let it inform and spill out and fill our life and our days. So let's sit for a moment. Rest in the space of awareness. Open like the sky, easy. Let the breath breathe itself, and let the waves of feelings and thoughts, of sounds, let them rise and fall like waves of the ocean. Sit like the Buddha in the midst of them all. And let the great heart of compassion and respect be present for everything that arises and passes away. So before we go out into the summer evening, first a thank you for your kind attention and your support for Spirit Rock and your being here. Really a pleasure. And for me it's great to come and speak on Monday nights because it's mostly I'm just talking to myself. Reminding myself, oh yeah, don't forget this stuff, when you go home, back to your family, out in traffic. I drove a taxi in Boston for 3 years, so I got